Peace on Drugs podcast, it's about ending prohibition. It's about talking honestly about things like addiction, overdose, drug safety. It's for people who may be suffering from addiction or people who are interested in trying psychedelics, people who want to understand more deeply the cartel problems in Mexico or the opioid regulation crisis here in the U.S. It's for people who are anti-prohibition and for people who promote sobriety and abstinence. It's for people who used to do drugs and people who still do.
I used to do drugs, I still do, but I used to too.
All right, if you're enjoying the Peace on Drugs podcast, make sure to go on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating. It helps grow our listenership. Also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Peace on Drugs podcast. Subscribe to our newsletter, www.thepeaceondrugs.com. Today's guest is psychedelic journalist Reilly Capps, who also co-founded the Denver Mushroom Cooperative. We had a great conversation about psychedelics and the laws around them and how they're changing. We talked about the importance of having a connection with nature. He shared his experience as an EMT and his thoughts on addiction. Peaceniks, I think you're going to enjoy this one.
Because we're a youth magazine, I didn't write about drugs from the perspective of the DEA, perspective of the drug companies or these new psychedelic companies. I went to concerts, I went to psychedelic club meetings, I went to campus, and I asked people, how do you actually use drugs and what actually happens to you when you use them? And so I learned that there are powerful drugs and a lot of people have changed their lives for the better and worse on opioids and stimulants and all kinds of things. People can get out of pain on opioids. They find themselves with more stimulated on stimulants and it helps them do their school better. But nothing was as life-changing for people as what they told me about happened to them on psychedelics.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Drugs are menacing our society.
What are your thoughts on the drug problem?
I had a great time doing drugs.
So tonight, from our family to yours, from our home to yours, thank you for joining us.
This is the Peace on Drugs.
All right, so first, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Thanks for
problem.
doing what you do. Thanks for talking about the Peace on Drugs.
Yeah, no problem.
It's coming up, hopefully.
We're starting to see the end of the war on drugs or the beginning of the end, and hopefully it keeps going in this direction. For sure. I was just doing some research, last minute notes this morning, and I saw you posted on Twitter yesterday something about a float center in Canada that sells microdose LSD for the float.
Yeah, Canada's a wild place, apparently, according to Twitter and a bunch of reports. Like, you can buy microdoses super easy. You can buy mushrooms in a lot of places. And yeah, man, apparently this float center, they'll sell you the 1p LSD microdoses that you can take right before you're floating. I don't know if you then have to float for 10 hours, like, to get the full experience. Or
I feel like at some point, if you start to get the experience, you'd want to get out of the float tank and, experience the world. Of course, I guess a microdose, you might be able to make it the whole way. I've done a few floats. I've never mixed it with psychedelics. It's just, I feel like it's psychedelic on its own, but I mean, I'd be open to trying it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever mixed it. I think I've floated, but I don't think I was on anything. It would be really a cool idea, because I find that, like, when I'm tripping, I definitely want the less stimulus possible. I like to be just under a blanket with eye shades on, music going.
I've never tried that. We sit in the backyard. I don't like to be around it. Like, I'm not into the party atmosphere anymore. I have done it at like festivals, and that's a different experience. And it's also fun if you have the right music, but I just like the peace and quiet in the backyard, maybe some music on playing, but I do want to try the blindfold experience, because, that's the therapeutic, like, when they do these new centers, right? People that want to quit smoking or whatever their intention that they set for their trip. It's not like, all right, say your intention and then listen to music and dance. It's like, now you're going to go into your inward, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. What's your backyard like? What's your setup there?
Well, I'm in Florida, so we have it's very green, palm trees and all that stuff back there. I really like I like our house. I like our backyard. I live in Fort Myers, Florida, not a big fan of. I hate to keep bashing my town, but
Mm.
it's just tourism, tourism.
Why are you there?
For I play music for a living. That's why I'm trying to do other things and eventually move away from doing we play a lot of, it's mostly cover stuff, like we write and stuff, but people don't want to hear that. So it's just there's a lot of work down here for musicians. So,
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. And in your backyard, you have a good setup. You have a nice chair. You have a good.
Oh, it's great. We have a big fire pit. So every night we do fires, nice. Which, we always talk about like, oh, on Monday we're gonna eat some mushrooms, and then when Monday comes, I'm always like, hey, I'm not really up for it, because you have to really be mentally prepared and in the right mindset to go into it. So it's usually like, we'll just hang out by the fire. But sometimes we do, and when we do, it's always a great time.
Who do you usually do it with?
My wife.
And well, good for you, man. I think that's the important thing, is like, if you're doing it when you're ready for it, and because these are clearly non-addictive substances, like, because you have to work up the energy to, okay, I'm really going to do it this time.
Exactly.
Here we go. I'm ready.
That's right. I talked to an ex-police officer, and he was talking to me about how addictive psychedelics are. He's like, well, they create such euphoria that you chase that. And I'm like, no, you don't, though. I was like, I've done psychedelics a lot, but not, consecutively, because once I have that experience, I'm good for a while, and I don't want to keep going back there. And I have tried once to do it too many times in a row, and it's almost like you have a worse experience, because you're like, you're not supposed to be here, and you feel it. You're like, it was too soon. Like, so you definitely spread that out. Not to say there aren't people that might abuse it. I mean, I think there's a small percentage of people that have that kind of compulsive mentality towards a lot of things. But for most of us, psychedelics are a very powerful experience that we don't want to continue daily or whatever.
Yeah. And I learned this when I was an EMT answering 911 calls in Boulder, Colorado, that there were certain drugs that people chased after. They needed it all the time. I don't want to paint how addictive something like opioids are, but like, a lot of people come to the ambulance and they would want to have the experience all the time. If you don't take opioids for a while, you get dope sick.
Mm-hmm.
You have this serious come down. And same with some other drugs, cocaine, and sort of you feel sad after you do it. And same with MDMA, that can also be an addictive substance. Same with ketamine, can be an addictive substance.
Really?
Yeah, but mushrooms and LSD and the other classic drugs, they seem not to have that effect on people. So we didn't see it in the ambulance hardly ever. I don't recall anybody being on LSD or mushrooms in the ambulance.
Or cannabis, traditional cannabis. I don't know if you have any experience with synthetic cannabinoids, but I know that they can actually be dangerous.
No, I have never tried one. Have you?
No, I haven't tried them, but I mean, experience as an EMT with somebody, freaking out on them, or what year were you an EMT?
I was an EMT from about 2016 to about 2019.
Okay, because I think they got outlawed in 2012. I think Obama outlawed the synthetic cannabinoids, because remember, they were sold in the and you could go to like a head shop and buy K2. Somebody gave me some once, but I read the not for human consumption, and I was like, I have actual cannabis. I don't need whatever this is. I threw it away. It just kind of scared me.
And I'm in Colorado, where they drop nuggets on the corner.
I love Colorado. That was the best experience. We went to Glenwood Springs and just pulled out a jar. I was like, this is amazing. And you live in Denver, right?
I live in Denver, so people just throw them out the side of their car window as they're passing by. People hand them out to homeless people instead of like giving them $1. Like, there is weed. We are saturated in weed. I mean, you look in the backyards in my neighborhood, there are cannabis plants poking up over the fence in like every second or third yard.
That's a beautiful thing to me. I mean, it's a pretty benign plant. I'm not going to say completely benign, but it's compared to alcohol, for instance, it's a much better recreational drug.
Yeah. When I was on the ambulance, it was alcohol, then some opioids, some meth, but cannabis and psychedelics just really did not show up. Very occasionally, we would pick somebody up who had gotten themselves into a paranoid state. They were scared, and we had to like take them into the hospital and have them sit there for a while. but it was
Yeah.
extremely rare. In my like 3 years, maybe I did that once. And maybe one time I dealt with a guy who had hyperemesis syndrome where he couldn't stop throwing up.
Oh, really?
Cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. This is a real thing, apparently. Well, no, I know it's a real thing. And so we had to take him into the ER, and he just sat there throwing up into a emesis bag over and over again, just being like, when is this going to end? When is this going to end? And I just had to be like, dude, it's on your cannabis. It's going to end. It'll be over in 3 hours.
Yeah.
Relax. I wish there was music here in the ER and maybe some Rick and Morty so you could chill out.
Now, if is that something that once you have that, it's like a sickness that he should stay away from cannabis, or was it just it happened to him that one time?
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's just a one-off thing.
Yeah. So it could happen to anybody, but it probably wouldn't be a reoccurring thing.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, in 3 years, I've only seen it once. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never had a bad. Well, I shouldn't say I never had a bad experience with cannabis. I've had an edible that was too strong, where you just you know you have 3 hours to get through, and you're going to get through it. It's not going to kill you, but it's going to be really intense. I'd rather have a mushroom trip than a heavy edible any day. I think I just have a low tolerance for edibles.
And I think like it's speaks to this idea that like, I mean, there's this thing going on in psychedelics right now, Dr. Carl Hart and other people, where they say like all substances are equal. We should treat them all equally. There's no better or worse drugs. Hamilton Morris also says this. And I have a lot of sympathy for that idea in terms of like how they're treated by the law, or how they're treated by like socially. Like, I don't think we should look down on people who choose to use one substance over another. I don't think we should give anybody prison for any substance, or any sort of fine for any substance. And at the same time, I do think that anybody who knows about these substances knows that they have different effects, and they have different levels of addictiveness, and you can get into more and less trouble on certain ones.
I agree with that. I read Dr. Carl Hart's book. It was really great and interesting, but I don't think I completely agree with him. And I hate to say that because he's so much more research than me. I mean, he's a doctor, to disagree with him. But I mean, the idea that we can casually do heroin, some people probably can. He's one of them. But a lot of people, especially people that are using it to escape trauma, are going to be using it compulsively, and it becomes very addicting because of the withdrawal. And I do think it should be legal. I think they should be able to go to a doctor and get counseling with it the way they do in Switzerland. But the idea is not to get more people to use it, it's to get people safely off of it. It's more dangerous and deadly on the streets, obviously, with the fentanyl crisis. Yeah. So,
I mean, I think the stat from the book was that 80% of heroin users do not get addicted. And you look at that and you say, okay, great. But that also means that 20% of people do get addicted. And to me, that's a high number.
Yeah.
You know, if it was anything else, if it was 20% of people that drive cars get in a car wreck, you'd be like, that is too high of a number for me. I am not going to get into that car.
That's a good point.
So I don't know what you do with that information, except, you know, certainly I don't think, except maybe you make laws differently in terms of different substances. And maybe you make some substances available in vending machines at the 7-Eleven, and maybe you make some substances where you have to have a sitter, and maybe make, you know, I'm not the person that's going to make all these rules, but somebody's going to make all these rules very soon, and they are going to change very rapidly. And so I think that's one of the things that you're talking about a lot is how they're going to change and how we're going to deal with these things going forward, because we can't just have them all illegal. No. And I don't think society is going to tolerate having them all in vending machines at the 7-Eleven.
No, we have to look at what other countries are doing, I think. And Spain has a really good model for simple just decriminalization, because then they test the drugs there. I can't remember the name of the group that tests there, but it's basically they said on the streets there you can buy LSD, MDMA, and like something like 85% of the drugs on the streets there are pure, because the dealers know that they're being tested. Whereas most of the drugs here are not. If you buy ecstasy here, it could contain fentanyl. If you buy LSD, a lot of it's that N-bomb. So,
yeah, was it Energy Control? Is that the name of the place in Spain?
Oh yeah, I believe it is.
Yeah,
Energy Control.
Yeah, I love that place.
Yeah, they say they're one of the highest rated in the world. A lot of other companies use them, send them the drugs for them to test. But I think that's a really good model. And like you said, with heroin, I don't think that'll ever be something that's sold in a vending machine, or should be. I think that, but I think it should be available for adults who are choosing to use it, but in a very, very controlled way, where they have to go to a counselor and therapist and talk about why they think they need it. Schizophrenics, for instance, they use it on the streets because it's a more comforting drug than this antipsychotic medicine. I think somebody is hearing voices. We shouldn't say they can't do heroin. Whatever's going to make them feel better, but it should be through a doctor and a counselor and all that.
Totally. And it's almost like we're talking about like setting up psychedelics so that you can take them with a therapist in a controlled setting. It almost seems like you should take heroin in that way.
Yeah. And I think that's how they do in Switzerland. They don't, I'm pretty sure that they don't give you heroin to take home. You go there, they give you your injection, you go to work and everything, and then you go back for a second one, something like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, you do get to go to work, but also people function on heroin. People that are heroin addicts can be highly functionable on those drugs.
For sure. 80% apparently.
Well, yeah. And I did hear Hamilton Morris actually on one of the podcasts I was listening with him. He actually did disagree with Dr. Carl Hart on just one thing. He said, I don't think anybody should be taking something that they have a physical dependence to, that's an unhealthy lifestyle. And I agree with that we shouldn't ever have something that if you don't have, you start getting horribly sick, you know?
I mean, it's back to my experience on the ambulance. It's just like what I saw on a daily basis was opioids put people on the floor, and opioids put people, I mean, literally kill people. I've seen people nearly die on opioids. I mean, I remember going into this one house in Boulder and finding this 22-year-old-ish girl on the ground, just cold as ice. And she had wrecked her veins to the point where we couldn't find a vein to put the naloxone in, which is, the opioid reverser.
So you actually use an injectable naloxone.
Mm-hmm. And we had to find a vein in her neck in order to get it. And because she had just used up every available vein on herself, and her house was a mess. There was trash everywhere. And then I was looking around for who this person was, and I found her ID, and it was a beautiful, healthy, vivacious girl in this ID photo, and it was from 2 years previous. It was like she had just wrecked herself in 2 years on heroin, and just had gone from this very great-looking girl, this great-looking girl, to this person that was just on the floor and may have done brain damage to herself from being knocked out from opioids. And it just showed me how quick this can go down. She may have been on fentanyl. And we just saw that again and again. I picked up a guy out of the bathroom of Subway who had used the needle that they had given him for naloxone to shoot up heroin. And so he didn't have any naloxone of his own. And he had used up his veins, and it just happened over and over again where I'd find these people that are so wrecked, and it just broke your heart, and it just showed you. So again, it's just like, what do you see on a daily basis? What do you like? We're not blind. Like,
yeah,
we live in this world, and we've all met people that do different substances, and we've seen how different substances affect you. And again, alcohol was the other big thing we found all the time, was people who had just wrecked themselves on alcohol, just like brain dead, Wernicke's encephalopathy, where they're like stumbling around because they've literally just rotted their brains. That's a very unscientific way to say it, but so I appreciate Dr. Carl Hart's thing. I appreciate him bringing us a more equitable, more even view of these things. And I don't want him to change what he's saying at all. I'm just saying, like, be aware of what things do, water is not Coca-Cola, salad is not a cheeseburger. It's all food, and none of it should be illegal, but just be aware of the differences. That's
true. And that's what it is. I think we have to be just completely honest about the things that we talk about. Like if we say we want heroin to be available to people that want it, I think we need that, but we need to be also honest with ourselves that this is not something that just should, like you said, heroin is different than mushrooms, is different than cannabis. And we got to be careful, but we clearly see that prohibition's not working with these drugs, because that's the reason fentanyl's here. And these analogs they get more and more dangerous as they change the molecules around, because they say as they add these different chlorine groups and stuff, the actual molecules get bigger, so they're harder to get through the blood-brain barrier, and they become more problematic in the blood. So I think that, and I, I have a friend that's a fentanyl addict, and like you said, I feel like he's aging a lot faster than he should be, and he's constantly battling with going to the methadone clinic, but methadone doesn't really work because it doesn't give them the high they really want, so they constantly relapse. And I feel like we could do better as a country. And I've lost friends to the opiates. People like a lot of people I've grown up with have either died or almost died. I had a friend that was overdosing, and luckily one of the guys that was there wasn't calling the police because they were scared about getting in trouble. They called another friend and asked what to do. The friend that they called was in California. He called the ambulance. He saved the life. The people that were there weren't going to do anything about it. And that's a problem with prohibition. People get scared about getting in legal trouble when someone's dying. So prohibition is just not working.
Is that what drives you to do this podcast?
That's the biggest thing is growing up. And I grew up in Gastonia, North Carolina, and I saw so many people just get wrecked on drugs. And I've had a lot of criticism from my podcast and people that don't understand what I'm talking about. They're like, drugs have ruined so many lives. How could you do this? It's like, well, I'm doing this because of that, because prohibition is one of the reasons that they're ruining people's lives. People have to do drugs in the dark, and going to, buying stuff on the streets. You don't know what you're getting. You're also paying a lot more money than it's worth. So you have to figure out how to get that money. That's where the crime rates go up. And I mean, addicts die because they're doing it, alone or hiding when they do it. And I feel like we could do better.
And being a musician, you must see it all the time.
I did when I was younger. I see alcoholism a lot now. I'm in Florida, we're playing at bars, and it's hard for myself sometimes. I go through, I try to, my rule is I try to not drink when I play, because they give you free drinks. Like you can drink for free, you can play. But if I drink at my gigs, then I'm drinking every day. So it's like, all right, no more alcohol when I play. But you see some musicians that are completely sober because they couldn't handle it. And then you see other ones that are still, when you see them, you can tell they're having a great time while they're playing. But alcoholism is a big one. Yeah.
And so your mission is to get people to see these differences between drugs and also just bring it out into the open.
Yeah, well, because it's weird. It's weird because when I say peace on drugs, it's a war on drugs. But drugs is a weird term because that puts everything under one blanket, right? And it's like you said, there's so many differences. And the thing is, I also like using drugs, and I did have a Vicodin addiction for a while, and so I understand opiate addiction. And I'm happy that I kicked the addiction without any rehab or anything, but it was not easy. And so I understand addiction. I don't think I can't compare it to a fentanyl addict or someone who's shooting up. It's probably a lot harder. I didn't get like really physically sick, but anyway, so I understand those drugs. And then also I see the positives of mushrooms and the psychedelic drugs. And I know like Dr. Carl Hart talks about how much he hates, the psychedelic people that kind of are evangelical about psychedelics, and then they condemn other drugs. But the thing is I've done all the drugs, and I really do think psychedelics can be very positive, and they shouldn't be put in the same category as drugs like heroin.
Yeah. So do you have ideas on like how laws should change, or if in your ideal world, what would it look like 10 years from now?
I think that all drugs would be decriminalized. That's the first step. We got to just, users and small time drug dealers, people, all that is decriminalized. I think that, like I said, the heroin and those drugs should be between doctors and patients. Doctors should have the right, but not these pill mill doctors that are pushing stuff to make money. It should be done specifically because these people could actually benefit from it. And psychedelics, I honestly, because I've heard a bunch of different schools of thought. One is so this actually brings me up to a question I was going to ask you about the ketamine clinics. So I'm thinking these ketamine clinics seem like like they're helping with addiction, depression, and anxiety and stuff like that. But I went to a consultation, and they said I fit the criteria because I have depression, some depression, as a lot of people do, and they said it's $4,000 up front. So I had to actually weigh, do I want to spend $4,000 of our savings? And I decided not to. But for a lot of people that could benefit from some of this stuff, like homeless people, they don't have $4,000 lying around the tent. There's no way they're going to benefit from that. And they could probably benefit the most. And as I think, and I don't know a lot about the ketamine stuff as much as I would do, like I knew about psilocybin. Do you think that as this law start to change with psilocybin, that it's going to look similar to the ketamine clinics where it costs a lot of money, it's very elitist? And
I mean, that's the big question, and I don't know the answer. As um, I want to say about the ketamines, it's clinics, that they are popping up all over the place. There were so few 5 years ago in the Front Range in Denver and Boulder, and now they're like so many. And people are turning to it for every problem, depression and anxiety and addiction. And they do seem to help. A lot of people come out of them saying that they are way less depressed, and the cures seem to be really temporary. People seem to like fall back into their depression within weeks or months, and then they have to keep going back to the ketamine clinic. And ketamine is really addictive. Like a lot of people that went there for depression end up buying it on the street and using it at home. And then they use it too much and get in trouble. And I know a lot of people who've gone down that road. And I think some of the people that run the ketamine clinics are using the ketamine on the side. I know that they are.
Yeah.
Because they enjoy it. It's a fun drug. And so
that could be you go there to treat your one addiction and you end up with another addiction. It's not healthy. That's why I think psilocybin would be a better choice. I've done them both, but I've done ketamine years ago. I mean, and so I don't have, any experience recently, but with psilocybin, at least it's not addictive, right? So if you go to one of these, if you went to a clinic that did a psilocybin ceremony or something, then what you got from it might be more beneficial.
Yeah, totally. So, so I was an EMT for 2 years and I learned a lot about drugs out on the street. And then I was the drugs reporter for Rooster Magazine, which is an entertainment and lifestyle magazine here in Colorado, and therooster.com. It's a lot of fun. It's a youth magazine. And so I interviewed a ton of drug users, like hundreds of drug users, maybe thousands, and wrote hundreds of articles about drugs over the years. And because we're a youth magazine, I didn't write about drugs from the perspective of the DEA, perspective of the drug companies or these new psychedelic companies. I went to concerts. I went to psychedelic club meetings. I went to campus, and I asked people, how do you actually use drugs and what actually happens to you when you use them? And so I learned that there are powerful drugs, and a lot of people have changed their lives for the better and worse on opioids and stimulants and all kinds of things. People can get out of pain on opioids. They find themselves with more stimulated on stimulants, and it helps them do their school better. But nothing was as life-changing for people as what they told me about happened to them on psychedelics. I met many, many people whose whole belief systems changed. They came to believe in all kinds of. We know that people's life, the ways people view life and everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
People came to believe in God. People came to believe in aliens. They thought they were living in a simulation. They came to think they were starfish seeds from other planets. They thought that trees were talking to them. And they also use psychedelics to heal their bodies, to heal from headaches and all these things. And I just didn't find that on these other drugs. And so that's why I think psychedelics are the class of drugs that have the potential to change society and to change us as people, because I've just seen so many people change, or I've talked to so many people who have changed their fundamental being through them.
Mm-hmm.
And so
there was a study done. Apparently it's at the Department of Human and Health Services data bank. They interviewed over 400,000 inmates and asked if they'd ever had even one psilocybin experience. And apparently just having one psilocybin experience meant they were 18% less likely to have committed a violent crime and 27% less likely to commit burglary. And just those numbers right there. And that's the study I heard from Paul Stamets. So I assume.
Yeah, there are a bunch of studies like that. And there's ones that say that there's a correlation between psychedelic use and nature relatedness, the ways in which you pay attention to nature or pay attention to trees. It's correlated with that. Yeah, it's correlated to anti-authoritarianism to some degree. It's correlated with believing in metaphysical things, in some kind of higher power or something else that goes beyond the material. And if more people have that experience and that idea, then I think it's a potential to really change the way our society lives, because we live in a kind of materialist world that is a little bit sad and depressed, and it looks like people think that this is all there is just the body and the rocks and the money and the social media followers, and that there's nothing else. But psychedelics tell a lot of people that there is something else, that there is something bigger, deeper, more fundamental, more astounding. And that's an interesting, I mean, that's going to change people, I think.
I agree.
So you were asking, like, do I think that we're going to do mushrooms in a clinic like that? I think that's right now being hashed out. I think that's the question, is how will we do psychedelics in 5 or 10 years? And, you know.
Yes, and I was reading the wording from one of your articles about the Denver Initiative 301. That growing, using, or possessing shrooms without selling them should be cops' lowest law enforcement priority, and the city shouldn't use resources to bust them. So this isn't really even decriminalizing. It's almost like a step below that, like where it's like they're still illegal. We're not going to say they're legal, but we're just going to stop looking. We're going to kind of turn the other way.
Yeah, I mean, I often say it's like almost like jaywalking, or like a level below jaywalking, or spitting on the sidewalk, where it's still illegal to jaywalk, but nobody prosecutes you for it. And actually, they are prohibited from spending money for prosecuting you on it. So they haven't gone after anybody in the past 2 years who was just growing and using them themselves. So it is a success in that sense, in that no one is going to jail for it. But it's not a success in terms of it's not created very many ways for people to do them, because it's still illegal to sell them. It's illegal to like have clinics, or it's illegal to like have a circle. So right now in Denver, you can, at certain head shops, if you know the person, you can buy them under the table.
So you got to know them, and it's not technically allowed. But if you're cool, they might be like, I know this guy.
Right. And so let me tell you what's happening in Denver if you're interested.
Yeah.
So you can do that. And there's one retreat center that's like a little bit above board, not above board, not legal, but it's above like ground, where they have a website, and you can come and trip in this nice house and with people who know what they're doing. But there's just the one, and they are very expensive. The group's retreats start at $2,800, and private retreats start at $20,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very elitist.
Yeah. There's a few people that will guide you. 2 or 3 people that are being open and have websites that say, if you bring your own mushrooms, you can sit with me and trip.
Like the Toby guy.
Toby. Oh, you wrote about Toby.
Yeah.
My buddy Toby. Yeah. So Toby, pay him, I don't know what his rates are now. They used to be $200, and you could sit in his house and bring your own mushrooms and trip on them. And yeah, it was great. You know, he puts the good music on, and he's trained by Zendo, and so he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And according to lawyers, that's legal. Like, to help somebody else use their mushrooms, that's like harm reduction. That's like being safe. But it's not legal. No, it's not legal to give them the mushrooms.
Gotcha.
And so most people just don't know how to find mushrooms. Most people don't know how to do this. And so it's not created any sort of like big open thing. So there needs to be new laws.
Yeah, definitely.
And so they're talking about, just 2 weeks ago or so, a group of mushroom type people presented to the city council that they think it should be legal now to sit in community, like have group trips, and also gift mushrooms to people. So not turn it into a business, but you could sit around with your friends openly, talk about it, and give mushrooms to your friends. And that could be protected from local law enforcement.
And then what you could do is say, like your friend Toby could say, it's $200 for me to guide you. The mushrooms are free. So it's kind of an included thing.
That's the theory. I think, I don't know that the lawyers would be cool with that, but that's probably what's going to happen, I would think, if the city council goes for this. But the city council wasn't really digging it. And so I would be surprised if the city council went for it. What's more likely to happen, I think, is there's there's language filed now with the state to create the kind of retreat centers that are going to happen in Oregon with psilocybin. So they're moving along the process to put something on the Colorado ballot in 2022 in November that would legalize basically retreat centers or sitting or guiding or things like that. And it's actually really interesting. They have included not just mushrooms in some of this language, but ayahuasca, iboga, mescaline, and all of the naturally occurring psychedelics.
Yeah.
Not all of the naturally occurring psychedelics, but several of them. I think 5 of them.
Gotcha.
And
now, is iboga, is that the ibogaine containing plant?
Yep. And so that is on the horizon. And so they're working through, the community's talking to itself like right now about, does this make sense? Is this where we want to go? Should we decriminalize everything first? Should we try to decriminalize all drugs first? It's a fascinating time, because that would create centers, and you would then be able to pay people to like sit for you, and they would provide the medicines, and you would have safe place, hopefully, and there'd be trainings and all that kind of stuff.
I like that.
So,
and going back to when you asked me where I see what I'd like to happen in the next 10 years, I would like to also have the ability, if I do go to a music festival, to be able to buy mushrooms there and have a safe place, because they have like the dance safe and stuff like that, but a lot of them have been kicked out of the festivals because they can't admit that drugs have been used because of the Rave Act. So if we could get to a place where you were allowed to do drugs there, because that's the reason at my age that I don't like doing drugs at like festivals, because of I don't want to get arrested at my age. Also, I start getting anxiety while I'm on the drugs, where when I was young, I just didn't care. So if it was safe and legal, I would love to go to a concert and, have a small dose, like a half-eighth, and enjoy, a great band or a few bands.
Yeah. And so that's another question, is like, if this thing passes and gets on the ballot, that's still not legal. And so you still could get in trouble for taking a microdose at a concert. And does that make sense? Should that still be illegal?
I don't think it should be. I think, though, I do think this goes back to residue from the 60s with music. But once you start, then it becomes a party thing, and they just shut it down. Like, we don't want, this is not for partying. This is only to be done for a therapeutic benefit kind of thing. And I do think that's where, so actually I was going to ask you about that. With the new age of psychedelics, as it kind of gets folded into the mainstream, because, with the microdosing in Silicon Valley, people are using it to be more creative and productive with their code writing. So society goes thumbs up on productivity. The curing PTSD with MDMA, this is another thing society gives a thumb up to. But do you think that what I believe the true purpose of psychedelics, which is to expand our minds and reconnect us with the sacred and with nature, that some of this might be lost as our current, consumer culture kind of takes in the psychedelics? Or is it possible they become like a Trojan horse, where they come in and then work from the inside out?
That's a beautiful question. And the thing about this model, where we have retreat centers where you pay money for someone to trip with you, that's wonderful. But it doesn't create space for you and your wife to go into your backyard and do it on your own. It doesn't create space for churches to do it as a religious thing. It doesn't create space for the connections that come from people using psychedelics. And if it always fits into the model of like, I pay you, you heal me, we are in a transaction, we are in the capitalist thing where you're trying to make money and I'm trying to get healing. We're not trying to connect. We're not trying to create anything. Then I think you lose a lot of what is great about these things. Like you said, it's this idea of, are we going to make them a hierarchical thing where you as the suffering person go to someone who has power to get your mushrooms, and they give you the mushrooms and they give you the healing, and it's like this top down thing?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we going to do more of a mycelial, organic, like horizontal thing, where we're all kind of in it together and we're all trying to like figure out where we're going together, and there's more opportunities for connection and creating communities? Can we do both?
That's what I was going to say. We might want to do a little blend of both. We need to have control, and because the problem is with it being illegal is I started psychedelics without there was no control. It was another kid that was also 16 years old. Hey, try LSD. And I took it before school, knew nothing about it. It was a really horrible experience for the first 2 classes. Luckily, he was in the class with me and was taught, because I was like, I'm just going to turn myself in. He's like, no. And so I didn't. And then the second half of the day, I loved it. That's why I think I ended up having a positive experience, but that can be traumatic for some kids. And I think that
was your first time?
First trip was LSD in high school.
God. How much do you think you took?
I honestly don't know. It was a sugar cube, so it was a liquid drop on there. But I mean, like,
did it feel like a lot?
Things were melting. Like, I mean, it was
wow,
super intense.
You must have been a pretty like mentally healthy person to like keep your wits about you at least a little bit.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Well, I was used to being really high. We'd always get high before class.
Oh, okay. So you got some experience.
Yes, but also it started weird because I remember I was sitting in first period and the girl in front of me, I know she was in the party and stuff, and she had done LSD. So I was like, hey, I just took some acid. And she's like, at school? And I was like, what, is that bad? She's like, I'd never do that at school. And then right then it hit me. Like and I was like, this is not good. This is not good. And just luckily, then the bell rang. I went to second period, and my buddy that did it with me was in that class with me, and he was just kind of laughing. And I think that kind of like calmed me down a little. Like, he's having a good time. So
that's so funny, because I grew up with DARE, and in DARE they told me you should never do drugs because they make you dumb and they rot your brain and they make you poor and you go to jail. And I was like, well, why are you even telling me this? Like, of course I'm not going to do drugs. Like, you don't tell me not to like light my foot on fire and run out in the middle of traffic. If these are so obviously terrible, what's the point of this class?
Right.
And then I was about 16 and I was in English class, and my buddy was next to me, and he leans over to me and he says, yo, Rouse, I'm on LSD right now. And I'm like, what? We're in English class. This is crazy. And then he started making good comments about T.S. Eliot or whatever we were talking about. And I was like, this is very bizarre. Something is not right. Somebody has lied to me somewhere. Either he didn't take LSD or DARE has told me something wrong about LSD. And that was part of what started me down the road of like, something's weird here.
That's very cool. Yeah, I actually I didn't realize it was microdosing because I'd never heard that term in high school, but I would take like a little hit of acid and cut it in 4 squares and take a fourth. And I remember I never had better grades in geometry. I understood math on a different level.
It's so funny. Yeah, it's so funny the difference between what they tell you these things are and what they are.
It's so true.
And I also think, to your point, it's a similar point. It's like now they're telling us these are antidepressants and anxiolytics, and it's like, yeah, they kind of are, but they're kind of not.
Yeah, they're completely different. But I guess that's what our culture wants to do, right? How do we package this and sell it in a way that we can make money and create more productivity? We don't, So it's another thing. Oh, go ahead.
I buy these studies. I mean, that they help depression. These clinical studies, they help. I've seen it a lot. And I also know that I've been to a lot of Grateful Dead shows and Fish shows, and the people there maybe are a little bit happier, but there's still a lot of depression and anxiety in those communities. So you can't just dump a bunch of LSD and mushrooms into the system and they're going to fix things.
I know that's like you hear people say all the time, and it's a fun thought. Like, you just go to a war-torn region and then just carpet bomb it with LSD and they'd all be happy and get along. It's like, in our fantasy land, that works fine. But in reality, that would probably make things more complicated.
Yeah. I mean, I still want to put LSD in the Pentagon's water supply and see what happens.
Wouldn't hurt anything.
Probably can't hurt.
No, I mean, they put it in our supply, right? The CIA did that, MK Ultra. So, I mean.
Yeah. Just so fair play.
So right before we go, last thing I'm going to say.
Oh, I got more time, by the way. If you want to do this a little bit more, I just feel like we're just getting into it.
Okay. Yeah, we'll keep going then.
Okay. What were you going to say though?
Well, I was going to say though, if we want to do this again sometime, I'd like to do it in person. I'll be in Denver in June.
Oh, great.
Going to a concert at Red Rocks. We're going to see Andrew Bird and Iron and Wine. So.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I just noticed your Red Rocks t-shirt. So.
Yep.
Oh, dude, I would go see Iron and Wine.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. That'd be great. Let's do it.
All right. So we'll get back to the conversation. We talk about the ketamine.
Yeah. Let's see what else. Let me see what else I got. Well, yeah, I mean, we're just talking about like this thing of how are we going to get these things? Yeah. I'm just highly interested in this idea. And are we going to take them in these clinics, or are we going to take them at concerts, which is apparently where you've done it the most, where most people have done it the most. And I just think it's, and can we do both, like you said? And will one squash the other? Because that's like the moment I think we're at right now. It's like, will one squash the other?
That if it gets too out of control, or if they perceive it as being out of control, they shut the whole thing down. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sure. Or Compass gets the ability to do mushrooms through a hierarchical model, through a doctor, and then it becomes very profitable for them. And then they make up some excuse why, we see that it has to be done that way. And then they find a way to make it so that no more laws are passed that. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm just saying, like, it's not that hard to affect the public's idea of what these things are, because the public doesn't know very much about them. And a concerted public relations campaign that said these things are necessarily, you have to do them under the supervision of someone else, could have very like powerful effects on on the way policy is made and the way the laws are written. And it can go in the other direction, where if something like this thing in Oregon where you can use mushrooms with a therapist or goes well, then there's really not a space for Compass. There's not much of a need for Compass. And so the more local model kind of crowds out Compass. And same here in Colorado. If we pass this thing where you can do a retreat center with ayahuasca, mescaline, psilocybin, and iboga, where's the model for Compass? How do they go? Why would you go to a doctor and do it through them? And it's probably going to be more expensive. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the motivations for a place like Colorado to pass these laws, so that because there is worry from people that Compass is going to come in and try to like take things over. And so that's the super interesting point that we're at, is, when laws get passed, they sort of get put in stone in some ways, and it's hard to change them once they're in the law books, even if you see that something doesn't work. So there are very heated discussions right now in Denver and about, do we do these laws? Do we just keep going with decriminalization? Because decrim is like steaming along toward Boulder and Colorado Springs.
Are they talking about all drugs like Oregon?
They would like to. It seems like there's not the political will to do that right now. The legislature seems not open to that. And last I heard, the Drug Policy Alliance, which did it in Oregon, was not sure that it would pass in Colorado to decriminalize all drugs, including heroin.
I wonder why that is, because people need to, if people understood that we're not talking about legalizing, if they understood the difference. Because I heard when Oregon did that, overheard people at the bar talking about, did you hear what Oregon did? They're crazy. They just want all drugs to be legal. It's like, you don't understand they're just stopping arresting poor people, basically, is what the laws are.
Yeah. I mean, I was surprised that there are people in Colorado that don't think it would pass, because it passed in Oregon with pretty healthy margins. I want to say 55% or something like that. And especially when it's packaged the way it was in Oregon, where it's like, we're going to decriminalize drugs and we're going to use the money for addiction treatment. Mm-hmm. So I think it would pass, but I'm not the person that has read all the studies and done all the polling, but that is happening right now. People are polling, Coloradans, people are polling in different states to see what can pass. And so that's exciting.
And Baltimore just did that too, right? But they did it through their DA, like it wasn't through a vote.
Yeah, I think it was. I think you're right. I think the DA did it. And And, you know, it's happening city after city, Ann Arbor, Seattle, you know, Santa Cruz, Detroit, just time after time. And then if you go up to Canada, it seems like you started this podcast, it just seems like people are super unafraid of opening mushroom shops and like ordering microdose kits online. And that's not the way it is in America. America, we're very still afraid of the DEA, because the DEA does come and bust some people sometimes.
And they've completely stayed away from cannabis, right? The DEA, have they been told by the federal government just to stop busting for that?
Basically, yeah. I mean, I think before about 2013, there was tons of DEA busts, but after 2013, they sort of laid off it.
And that's Obama policy.
Yeah, the Cole memo, and that has kept going. But like in Denver, there was one guy that was busted for growing a ton of mushrooms by the DEA, and that made everybody really scared. Mm-hmm. And that shut down a lot of home grows. Oh, I want to bring up one more thing that I am part of a research study through CSU, Colorado State University, where we're interviewing underground psilocybin practitioners, mm-hmm. people that do this for a living right now, just off the books. And we're asking them what they want in new laws. And because I think these are important people to listen to. These are people mm-hmm. that do it for a profession right now. And so what do they want? And there's a lot of diversity about what they want. They some want more or less rules. I think interestingly, almost nobody wants like no regulation. Almost nobody wants just anybody to be able to do any sort of guiding. A lot mm-hmm. of them think there should be some sort of accountability. But I think what was sort of consistent between them was they didn't want it to come from the state. They wanted it to be people like just looking after each other. They're being like kind of informal boards, or I mean, it's kind of an idealistic hippie thing, but it's also just sort of like the way mountain guides are regulated. Mountain guides are not regulated by the state. They're regulated through a private nonprofit that can tell whether you're qualified to be a mountain guide.
Okay.
Because mountain guides know whether mountain guides are good at mountain guiding, and the state doesn't.
Right.
And the similar thing maybe with psychedelic guides, where guides know if other guides are good at guiding, and they could sort of regulate each other. This is, I think it's an interesting idea, and I think it's worth exploring, because I think it's brings that community aspect in. Mm-hmm. The community is policing itself, and it's not just a big monolith taking care of people. So, and the other thing they want is more flexibility in terms of like, not just you take a macro dose with a guide in a retreat center, but more like you could microdose, you could take it and go to a concert, you could mm-hmm. Self-experiment, things like that. So that study was included. Our preliminary results from that study was given to the city council, and hopefully they're going to take that into account when they are like making new laws. So that was exciting. And then that idea of community control is like slowly moving around, and like Oakland's thinking about it, and some other places are thinking about it. So I just wanted to put in a word for that.
Okay, cool. And so that'd be like could do some idea, like what is it, the American Association of Psychology or whatever that is for psychologists or psychiatrists, something for that of that level, where you have a group that anybody could join, but they kind of decide not necessarily the laws, but how they're going to handle, kind of overseeing whether you have drum circles or wherever you're allowing these psychedelics to go. You have people that are members of this board or whatever.
Yeah, like a community board of like elders and wise people mm-hmm. that also allow for some flexibility. So like if it turns out drum circles are cool, then we allow that. Then if it turns out that they're too wild or whatever, then reel that back. Just the community decisions. You know, we have such a breakdown of community. Like our communities are just decimated. They're just not the way they were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, where people knew each other. And but if I in my dream of dreams, psychedelics help people to reconnect with one another and recreate community. And again, to just turn it into like where you go to a clinic, I think loses that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. The clinic setting. Now there are places in Costa Rica that I've looked into, these retreat centers they actually keep you in touch with nature, right? You go on these hikes and you do these yoga and you do meditations, and then you do a peyote ceremony, and then another day of hikes, and then you do a mushroom ceremony. And like, so that to me sounds awesome. I mean, and they're actually affordable in that country. That same thing might cost 20,000 here, but it's like 2,500 there.
Yeah. And I think it remains to be seen. Wouldn't it be sweet if you could do that in Colorado?
Yes. It'd be awesome.
Oh, go up to a cabin and spend a week there, do hike and meditation and yoga, and then a mushroom journey.
Yep.
Oh, how sweet would that be?
It'd be awesome. And I think, and also about like the concert idea, I think it could be possible that we don't allow, like you can't go to Bonnaroo and buy mushrooms, but if you have a specific card from somebody that shows that you've done enough trips that you know how to handle yourself and conduct yourself with them, and you're whoever, I don't want to say shaman, but there's whoever's in, your doctor or whoever you go to gives you the okay, then you're able to do mushrooms at these festivals. So it's not some young kid freaking out who's never done them.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the guides that I interviewed didn't want no regulation. They didn't want no laws. Everyone agreed, like, if you're too young, you shouldn't be able to do this. 16 is probably too young.
I think so.
If you're not all there, maybe you shouldn't be doing it.
You have to consider schizophrenia or bipolar if it runs in your family.
Yeah, and I don't know how you legislate that or whatever, and if you have kids, maybe you shouldn't be doing it around your kids, although I've often seen that go fairly well. Yeah, I don't know. It's a fun time to be alive.
It is. I mean, I think it might be a funner time in 100 years when this is all behind us, but at least we're living in a time where we're seeing it start to change.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I'm in Florida, so nothing's changed here. We have medical cannabis, which is great, but it's only one step in the direction. And it's another elitist way to say, if you have enough money, we won't arrest you for this. But if you don't have the money to pay the doctor fees, because I've seen poor kids from poor neighborhoods I've talked to that have been arrested and been charged with felonies for having a vape cartridge with THC, because they've made those a felony now. And if you don't have your medical card, it's just ridiculous.
Are there mushrooms in cow pastures where you live?
There are. I've never went looking because it's all private land, and I've read many accounts of people getting arrested going shroom picking, and
really?
Also, yeah, in Naples and different areas down here it happens. But I don't think it's a huge thing that happens, but it does happen. You get arrested for picking mushrooms. But
how do they catch you?
I guess the whoever owns the land calls about it, and honestly, it is strange to me that you would get caught. I guess because I would do it early in the morning before the sun comes up, but. I have a friend that picked them, and I've done the ones around here. They're not quite as potent as they're a little weaker. They're good though. But I have a friend that grows them. So I just, and I do that. So that's one thing I hate though, is the fact that I have something that is illegal. I'll just, for the record, I don't have any now. Let's just say that. But point is if I want to do them, I can get them, and and I'm very safe with them, and we do them at home. But that's the reason I don't go pick. I actually did go. I went and bought hiking boots and was planning on trying to go to some areas and look around, and I just didn't find any. And it wasn't too long when I started to do that. I was going to keep going on different adventures, and then a friend called. Is like, "Hey, I just started doing this," and I was like, "Oh, cool!" So I don't have to hike through all the woods of Florida.
Is that where people get them in Florida, or most people grow them?
Most people grow them.
Yeah, that's.
Apparently, it's pretty easy. I gave a half attempt of trying, and it didn't work, but.
Yeah, that is one thing that's happening in Denver, is a bunch more growing classes. And people are teaching each other how to grow. There's more businesses that are selling substrates. People are more open about selling spores. So there is a bunch of home grows that have popped up.
Yeah, but that's really cool. I'd like to grow cannabis. And if you have your medical card here, you still can't grow it, which I just don't understand that law. But so what's the law there in Colorado? How many plants can you have?
Oh, they changed it not long ago. I want to say it's 6.
So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And there was a time when it was really easy to go to a doctor and tell him that your knee hurt and that you couldn't smoke it, so you needed edibles. And then the doctor would give you permission to grow 50 or 99 plants.
Really?
Yeah. So you had all these healthy 25-year-olds running around with knee pain so bad that they had to grow 99 cannabis plants.
That's like an occupation. I mean, that's a full-time job, right? If you're growing that kind, like you're a farmer at that point.
Yeah. There were all these people that were renting houses in the suburbs with giant basements and setting up lights and just churning out pounds and pounds of weed and then sending it across state lines, of course. But they had their little certificate that said, "Oh, I'm very sick." And it's like, "I saw you at the gym last night. What do you? You're
That was
sick."
thanks to the edibles. Without the edibles, no way I would have been on
Right.
that. No.
This is me on my 99 plants. Otherwise, I'd be bedridden.
Yeah, that was happening. I mean, basically the medical card is a joke. I mean, you go to there and you can tell them anything. And actually the doctor is like shaking his head both ways for each question, like trying to get to the list as fast. Do you have this? Yes. This? No. And you're just like, up, down. He's like, all right, here's your card. You come back in 7 months and give us more money and keep it going.
You've been there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, tell them that your knee hurts, and the doctor's like feeling your elbow. Like, "Oh yeah, that elbow, that feels terrible." It's like, "No, doc, it's my knee." Whatever. Close
Gotcha.
enough.
And I mean, I've been to the medical doctor in Florida, not what you're talking about.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Gotcha.
One time I went to a clinic and I was like, I was as a reporter, I went to a clinic and I was talking to them about how it worked. And they were like, "Do you want your card?" And I was like, "No, there's nothing wrong with me." And they said, "Well, why don't you talk to a doctor? See if the doctor thinks there's anything wrong with you." And it's like, it was just like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we can find something wrong with you if you want your card.
Yep.
Yeah, that was early in weed. That was like 2004 or something like that, right after when there was only medical.
Yeah, I remember when they first passed the medical law here, there was a period that it was still really strict until they kind of ironed out the law. So I went, but I was like the first in line. I'd be like, "All right, how do I get this card?" And I was like, PTSD, childhood trauma. And they were like, "Yeah, you have to have a psychiatrist actually diagnose that. We're not just going to pat." Like they were very strict. I was like, "Oh, I thought it was just say something and you get it." They're like, "No, like this has to be." So I went to a psychiatrist and talked about my childhood. And the psychiatrist is like, "Yeah, I don't think you have PTSD, but here's the thing. I'm just going to write that you do because I think it's safer for you to get pot from this place because the pot on the streets is laced with cocaine," which he was a foreign guy. So I was like, I think he didn't understand. I don't know. It's like, I've never smoked any cannabis laced with cocaine that was like without me. No, I mean, if somebody did it, they would tell you, right? Like this is not something that happens ever, but he's like, it's more dangerous on the streets. I was like, all right, cool, whatever. So he wrote the thing, but then
Whatever.
it was like a month later, I went to the cannabis, back to the place and the laws had changed. And the doctor's like, "Why'd you go to a psychiatrist? You didn't need to do that. Like, I can just check this box." I was like, "Oh, like on the phone, they said all this crazy stuff." I don't know.
Thank you, pot doctor that knows nothing about pot.
Actually, that guy, the guy that I ended up talking to was really cool. I showed up and they were just opening up and I walk in and this guy lets me in and I go in the back. He's wearing a Cake shirt, the band, and he's drinking a beer. And he's like, and he's got all the scruff and he's like, "Oh, we're not even open." He's told his buddies, "We aren't supposed to let people in." He said, "We don't open till tomorrow, man." He's like, "But I'll tell you what, I'll get you an appointment." The next day, he's like, had his scrubs on, clean shaven, was more professional, but he was just kicking in the back. He's a cool dude.
Yeah, there are doctors here that'll give you prescriptions with like Marley posters on the wall.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you really a medical doctor at this point?
Exactly.
There was crazy stats back in the day about like 80% of all cannabis prescriptions in Colorado came from like 10 doctors or something like that. Really? Just churning them out. And that's one of the interesting things about the mushroom thing is like, if we just do the compass thing where it comes to a doctor and a therapist, you're going to have a prescription. You're going to have to say that you have depression. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to say that you have treatment-resistant depression. So there's going to be a lot of people that are playing up their depression in order to get a mushroom treatment. And it's just going to create this like weird kind of lying situation or fudging situation that we had with cannabis in a long time. With the Oregon model, you don't have to have a prescription. You don't have to have a malady. You don't have to have depression. You don't have to have PTSD. You can just want to like explore yourself. You can just want to sit in nature.
Yeah.
And so that's another important thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about whether to go one way or the other, support one route or the other.
Yeah. Well, I think there's that expression, the betterment of well people.
Yeah.
Like just because I'm not messed up and not depressed all the time doesn't mean I can't do better and be happier than I am now. And I think that's most people, right? Everybody has some sort of trauma, even if it's not something that affects you daily, but just we have to deal with the death of our loved ones on some level. So, and that's a big thing for the psychedelic or the psilocybin mushrooms that MAPS was doing, was end of life anxiety for people that were terminal. But one of the things I was reading that brought up is like, so this old man who has cancer goes and does has his mushroom experience and is no longer afraid of death, and actually says he's blessed and he's happiest he's ever been. But his wife isn't. Why can't she do it with him? Because she has to deal with the loss of him. And he has this revelation that's lifted the anxiety of death, but she hasn't. She's depressed. Her husband's going to die. So it's not just the people who are terminal or the people that are depressed. I think we all could benefit from these substances.
It's a way of looking at yourself in terms of like, I'm something that's broken that needs to be fixed. I was a great person, a totally functional, wonderful person. Then I got depressed. And if I could just fix my depression, then I'd be back to my wonderful self. And that's a way of looking at yourself that's like a little bit harsh almost. It's like sometimes depression is part of a healthy reaction to a world that is disconnected and just sadness of living in modern consumerist society that separates us from each other. You get depressed because you live in a concrete jungle and you don't have a clan around and your family lives a long ways away. And so depression can be a very useful source of information. And this non-pathologizing way of dealing with it is an interesting shift in like how we see each other, how we see ourselves. It's not like I'm normal most of the time, and then occasionally I get depressed and I come back. It's like I'm up and down, I'm this and that, I'm happy and sad. I'm writing a story today about indigenous practitioners of ayahuasca down in the Amazon, and this interview with this shaman down there, and he's talking about how it's just such a different framework. It's not like people come in and we're depressed and then we relieve their depression. It's looking at people on a spiritual level, on an energetic level, saying that you've gone out of balance with yourself, you've gone out of balance with nature, and we're going to try to get you back in balance. Not that you're bad or wrong or there's something broken about you that we're going to fix. Like car mechanics go into a car and like adjust the carburetor to make it better. It's more like you would look at a plant. If the plant's not growing very well, you would say, okay, it's not in sunlight, it's not getting enough water, it's not getting enough air. You change how you deal with a plant like that. The plant is not in balance with its environment. How often do you go to a psychiatrist, say, I'm sad, and they say, we'll get some more sunlight, more air, more water, better food, better exercise. Generally, they give you a pill and try to like tinker with you like you're a broken down old Volkswagen, which I think is not fundamentally what we are.
Exactly. I went to someone's house had suffered from different things, and they had a whole bunch of pill bottles on the counter, all these different like Adderall, Xanax, and Wellbutrin or whatever, all these things. And it's like the doctor keeps instead of taking one away and trying another, they're just like put this in, and eventually we're going to get you balanced. It's like, no, I think all this is completely messed up and backwards. I mean, like you said, but that's our culture, right? Our culture isn't about, it's about, because what can we sell you? Not what can you do to make yourself better? Because if what you do to make yourself better doesn't give us money, then we don't want to push that on you. But it is exercise and diet are going to be your main two things, and sunlight. I believe, I'm a firm believer in that. In Florida, I live in Florida, and I think it makes a big difference being able to go outside year round and be in the sunshine.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Denver. We have 300 days of sunshine. We got the mountains right over there, and I mean, maybe it's an overgeneralization, but I feel like people are happier than when I lived in New York and Washington, D.C., where it's just concrete and people are stuck in these like tiny apartments and they don't see trees. I mean, this indigenous shaman that I'm writing about today, and I was like, the healing comes from trying to reconnect with nature. And that's where the healing is. Like, the healing is wishing to hear from the plants, he says. It's this relationship between you and the plants.
Mm-hmm.
That's their whole like gig down there, is they're trying to listen to not just the ayahuasca, but the tobacco and all these other plants. And that's such a different way of thinking about it than the way we think about it. It's almost like we're treating the mushrooms and the ayahuasca up here as a commodity to be used as another extension of our capitalist system, where we look at the ayahuasca and the mushrooms and we're like, what can we get from it? How can you help us? And with them, it's like a lot more reciprocal, where they listen to the mushrooms and the ayahuasca. And it's like, how can we work together?
Mm-hmm.
How can we get into balance? How can we plant more plants? How can we live with nature in a more balanced way? I just don't think it's going to work necessarily for people to continue to live in concrete holes, disconnected from each other, occasionally take a mushroom without having that connection to nature.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's super interesting, this story about this Shipibo shaman. And when I first started taking psychedelics I used ayahuasca with one of the churches that's legal here in America
Mm-hmm.
for quite a while. And they had lost a lot of their connection to the Shipibo and Amazonian lineage. And I thought that was okay. But nowadays I think like it's important to listen to these folks who have done this for a long time, and not to mimic them or do it exactly the same thing, or like act like they don't have problems, or like they're perfect, or like we don't have we have smart things too. Like we understand some things about these drugs on a like a molecular level, and but like, what do they tell us about listening to the plants? What do they tell us about balance? What do they tell us about paying attention to each other? Like, healing is always in a relational thing for them. Like, you heal in relation to your tribe and your family. And in America, it's like, I'm on my own healing journey. I'm going to make myself better.
Yeah.
And everybody else can do whatever they're doing.
Yeah. And our species, we evolved to be a part of nature. With the hunter and gatherer tribes, they moved where the flocks went. They moved where the seasons went. They were a direct part of nature, the way animals are. And now we've completely separated ourselves from our natural environments. And so I do think that's the I'd honestly, have you done any that actually went down to the Amazon for any of those?
So I've been to Iquitos, I've been to the Amazon. I did not do anything down there. I did not use ayahuasca down there. No. But up here,
are you against the tourism aspect of that down there?
No. So this was a long time ago. I was dating a Shipibo woman at the time, and just coincidentally, it wasn't. And she took me down to meet her family down in Iquitos, and we toured the Iquitos for a while. We went down the Amazon River for quite a while, and this was 2007 or so, 2008. Mm-hmm. This was before the ayahuasca boom was really going, and she, even though she was Shipibo, she had lost the connection to it, mm-hmm. because they, for a long time, saw it as like a backwards thing that was done by the people who were not educated city, and that's what they were all trying to be for a while, may still trying to be. And so even though her mom had done ayahuasca, it had not made it down to my then girlfriend's generation. Mm-hmm. So I asked her back then, like, do you know a place? Can we try this?
This wasn't on the table, really.
Wasn't on the table. She didn't know it. And then I haven't been back since. I've done it in a Shipibo way up here a few times. Yeah.
I've never done ayahuasca. I've smoked DMT. Have you done that? Mm-hmm. What does it compare, or is the DM like I know the DMT smokes a lot shorter, but as far as the experience?
Yeah, it's a lot. DMT is a lot more visual, like way more visual. Way less body. Mm-hmm. I mean, so you have smoked DMT. It's just like,
Yeah,
so
I did
ayahuasca is just more longer. It's softer. It's like,
Was it more similar to mushrooms?
yeah, kind of.
That's what I've heard. Last time I smoked DMT was probably about 2 months ago in my backyard, and I went into the world of color where you're not in this dimension, and I've never seen the elves or anything like that, but I have felt the entities. But when I came back out, it was the coolest thing ever. There was some kind of entity flying around my backyard. I couldn't actually see it, but because it was always ahead of my vision, but it was laughing and it was lighting up plants as it went. And every time I did, the plant would light up and come at me, but like in a dancey way. It was just showing me my backyard. I was like, you got to check out your backyard. And it was laughing. I was laughing. It was so cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. And yeah, are those not the weirdest thing in the whole world?
Mm-hmm. It's great though. It's amazing. And then but that's why it's not addicting. I wasn't like, that was so cool, let me do it again tomorrow. I was like, I'm good for a while. Like that was so powerful and fun that I'm like, all right, had that.
Yeah, I always have to work up the courage to do more ayahuasca because it is something else. I mean, you're just in it for so long and it's so intense sometimes. And so you have those entities that are with you, but they hang out for longer. You can sort of talk to them more. They're a little less frenetic and jumpy around. So you can have more dialogues with them and hear more of what they have to say to you, which is you know.
I'm gonna have to do that, definitely. I mean, it's on my list of things to do for sure. I was talking with a friend of mine about doing a trip to Peru. Do you think that the tourism thing down there is hurting things? Because remember, was it Maria Sabina? Like she got devastated. I mean, she died poor, penniless because of her town basically shunned her because she brought Western society into that village. Is it anything like that happening in Peru where there's like an anti-tourism movement on that?
Yeah. I don't have a lot of expertise on this, but I am writing today about this shaman down there who, this is for Shakruna.net, and it's an interview that Shakruna did, and I'm just sort of recapping it. But this shaman is like, there's good and bad here. Like because he now has a profession, he now works at one of these retreat centers, healing Westerners. And now so he has a job and he wouldn't have had a job before. And he's not like mad at the Westerners. He's not like, you guys are weird or you're stealing our culture. He seems very open to like sharing his wisdom with us and sharing his perspective and doing what he can to try to heal, which is all this energetic, spiritual, nature-based work. And so I've heard that like it's crazy down there, and Iquitos now is pretty choked with tourists trying to get ayahuasca, and it's a lot more like grubby, where people like come at you a lot and they're like trying to sell you stuff. Which when I went there like 15 years ago, it was not like that. It was this idyllic jungle place, no cars, like cars can't get there.
Oh yeah.
So I've heard that it's good and bad, I think. I mean, it's just, there's so many forgotten tribes. Like how many tribes do I know about in the world? And yet the Shipibos are now like kind of famous in my world, where like everybody's doing Shipibo ceremonies. And I think my then girlfriend would probably be mad and think it's cultural appropriation. And I can see that because like everybody claims to be trained by the Shipibos nowadays, like up here in Colorado in these ayahuasca ceremonies. Yeah. I think it's just, from my perspective, if it can be a two-way street, then I think it's okay.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I know there's a difference with like the peyote because like Michael Pollan's new book, he went out to the peyote ceremonies, but he didn't do it himself because he's like, I'm a Westerner. But peyote there's a limited source of natural occurring peyote. It's an endangered species. And so we shouldn't, so I could see that. But with ayahuasca, that's not an issue, right? Like there's plenty of it.
I think it's up to like each tribe or whatever. I was talking to an indigenous peyote person not long ago, and they said, look, we just don't want white people to do this. Like, this is our thing. Go find your own thing. Like, if you guys start doing this, somehow it's just going to lose the magic, and we need this magic.
So our thing should be LSD, right? That's a Western culture thing, and it's my favorite, honestly.
Yeah.
But it has because of the name acid, it has a bad rap and all this negative propaganda against it, that it's like the most taboo
Yeah.
one of all of them.
I agree. And then, so that was that one indigenous person's perspective. Then I talked to a Comanche a couple of months ago who said, like, you know, don't do peyote and don't steal our ceremonies. But if you want to do mescaline and you want to like take some of our big lessons from it, then that's okay.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
if you want.
And that's what Michael
So
Pollan did, actually. He did mescaline, but not peyote.
yeah. Like don't try to be us, but do learn, like, hey, do it in a group and have God on your mind and like do it for healing and pay attention to nature and stuff like that. So one of the other interesting thing I wrote about recently was like indigenous reciprocity.
I just read on your Twitter about that. Yeah.
Some of these companies now are like, these psychedelic companies are dedicating part of their equity. Like, so a tenth of their company is now dedicated to like giving back to indigenous folks. And that's really hopeful. I mean, cannabis didn't do that.
Well, in certain places, cannabis did it for the African-American communities that were, because they've been hit the hardest with the war on drugs. And I think that's given them,
that's totally positive. Yeah. Right. And there's some companies that are doing that, and that's wonderful. And I don't know how big this indigenous reciprocity is going to be in psychedelics, but I think that it's going to be an aspiration, sort of like in the old days, like if you made your food organic, it was like a real edge. Mm-hmm. And then later on, it kind of like you had to do organic if you wanted to be at a certain level as like a restaurant. So I think like a psychedelic company that will engage in indigenous reciprocity and send money back to the tribes will be at sort of a different level and like get more cred and hopefully more business. Mm-hmm. And also legitimately like do a better ceremony. Like if you're learning from the indigenous, hopefully you're going to have a better experience. So partnership, I think, is like the watchword. Like, don't just take our traditions, is what these indigenous folks are saying. Like, partner with us, learn from us, like see what we want, listen to us. Don't just be about money. Don't just be about yourselves. Don't just try to like take everything you can to make yourself feel better. Like think about the whole ecosystem, think about balance, think about nature. I mean, I always come back to nature, man. I really think connection to nature is like my thing. And it's a big part of this indigenous thing.
It is. Have you read Johan Hari's book? I feel like it was the Lost Connections one, but he talked about the accidental experiment that played out at a prison where half the windows in the prison faced farmland and the other half faced like a wall. And the levels of sickness, not just mental, but physical sickness, were drastically higher on the wall that faced the window that faced the cement wall. And that just right there, you see that just seeing nature, even if you're locked in a cage, is better than not, you know?
Yeah. And there's like something on hospitals. If you put people in in their sick beds faces nature, they get better faster.
It makes sense.
Students, before they take tests, if they study for 10 minutes versus spend 10 minutes in nature, the people who spend 10 minutes in nature actually do better than the test.
Wow.
Than people who spend 10 minutes studying somewhere.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So
I think it's very important. I spend a lot of time in nature, do a lot of kayaking. That's, like I say, I don't like Fort Myers sometimes, but as far as the nature here, I do. It gets it's really flat here. That gets tiring. Sometimes you just want a hill or a mountain or something. But I do love spending time in nature. And yeah, I've even heard stories of people that were diagnosed with cancer. This one guy, and he started when he got the diagnosis, woke up every morning and went on a hike and watched the sunrise from this mountainside and ended up getting better. Like,
yeah. I mean, I had a lot of depression earlier in my life, and the SSRIs didn't really work, and nothing that they gave me worked. But I moved to a ski town, and I went skiing every morning in the ski season, and I went hiking every afternoon in the summer. And that was the best antidepressant that I could ever have had. Mm-hmm. It just changes you. It just centers you. I just loved it. So I think if we do mushroom retreat centers in the future, I think that nature is where it's at.
Yeah, let's definitely include the hikes and all that stuff like we talked about. That'd be great.
Yeah, that's the hopeful. That's the hope.
Yep.
Get out in nature, connect with nature.
Well, that's probably a good place to end this, right? So thank you for doing this. Really, this was awesome. Great talk. And like I say, I'll be in Colorado in June, so I'll reach out to you before then. And
do I need to buy tickets to that thing?
Yeah.
All right. Iron and Wine, Red Rocks.
Yep.
Okay. Sweet.
Yeah, it's the third year that it was 2020, got postponed to 2021, got postponed to 2022. I imagine this one will actually happen.
Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, and then
that'd be great.
I'll bring my my travel mic and stuff, and we can maybe sit and do a podcast in person.
Yeah, that'd be super fun, man. Thank you so much for doing this. Thanks so much for doing what you do. Thanks so much for stepping out, even if your friends are like telling you that you're like putting the wrong message out. Thanks for being brave.
Yeah, that wasn't my friends. That was just random people online that get anyway.
Okay,
but yeah, and thank you for doing what you do too, man. I love what you're doing, and
thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thanks, man. Take care. Go enjoy some nature, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you later.
All right, bye.
Bye.
All right. Follow Reilly on Twitter at Reilly Capps. That's ReillyCapps. Read his articles. Follow me at The Peace on Drugs. As always, thanks for listening, and peace out.